Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With coronavirus cases increasing by an unbelievable 270,000 a day and 1,600 deaths every day, my guest today believes that India's critical institutions have let down the country at this moment of crisis. And as he says, we haven't faced a crisis like this since independence. Joining me now to explain why he believes India's institutions have let down the country is one of India's foremost lawyers, former president of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Dushyant Dave. Dushyant Dave, I want to focus on that point that you made to me earlier, that India's critical institutions have let down the country at this moment of crisis. I'll go through the main institutions one by one so you can explain your thinking. And let's start with the Modi government. Why do you believe the Modi government has let down India at its worst crisis?
Well, the answer is in manifold, but let me begin by saying something which is very important. And I say so with utmost respect to the Prime Minister, who is our Prime Minister, and I don't mean any disrespect to him. But I do say with some amount of sadness that this, with all my reservations for Prime Minister Modi, which are well known, I do feel that if Prime Minister Modi failed, this country is heading for anarchy. But then I must also admit that Prime Minister Modi is doing everything to fail. And this is what really amazes me, because the Prime Minister has the capacity to really do something good for this country. He has the mandate to do that. He is an extremely hardworking person. He is very good in uptake. So what is it that he and his entire cabinet is not doing, which has resulted in this completely avoidable deaths of innocent citizens in thousands and millions of them today at this very moment, suffering beyond imagination, beyond repair, and beyond any kind of comfort? Now, this is something which is really bothering me a lot. You know, we have followed the British system of parliamentary system. We have a cabinet, and of course, the executive power of the union government, that's the central government, rests with the president. But he acts on the advice of the Council of Ministers, and Prime Minister is at the head of the Council of Ministers. But what this principle recognizes is very important: collective responsibility of the cabinet. And this is very, very important, because when you are governing the country as the Prime Minister, aided by a cabinet, you are collectively responsible for all the actions and inactions that take place.
Can I ask you a couple of pointed questions? Because you said a very important thing. You said, at the moment, Mr. Modi is doing everything to ensure that he fails. Let me ask you a couple of pointed questions. First of all, do you believe that the Modi government was irresponsible in not planning for and not knowing there would be a second wave, and that the second wave would be worse than the first? After all, every country in Europe and in America had second waves and third waves, and they were worse than the first. Yet, on the 8th of March, Mr. Harshvardhan, our health minister, publicly said, we are at the end game of coronavirus. So my question is, do you think this government was irresponsible in failing to predict and then prepare for a second wave?
I genuinely believe, and that it's not just failure, it's a gross failure. And to my mind, these are criminal failures on the part of the government. I mean, just take it that if this kind of inaction had been done by any private sector organization in respect of any disaster which was likely to strike, let's say in a factory, large factory, they did not have sufficient firefighting equipment, and a huge fire strikes and people die, the entire board of directors would have been arrested by the government. Now, what is troubling me is that with 500 people having COVID in March of 2020, Prime Minister went ahead and declared a lockdown of 21 days, which was, of course, at that point of time, extremely unwise and very, very ill prepared. It was not really the right time, and people suffered. The sufferings of those migrant labor and the national citizens are innumerable. We all know about it. The world knows about it. What is really important, Karan, is this, that the Prime Minister and his cabinet, who are responsible to us as citizens, they are the guardians of our lives and our well-being, our health. They failed twice. They failed first in stopping the first wave of COVID, and I'll tell you why. The second time, they have now failed disastrously. And the consequences are to be borne not by Prime Minister and his cabinet ministers, because they are all ensconced in their super luxury homes. They have the best of the facilities at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. They fly in private jets. The suffering is done by the common man. Medicines are not available. Food is not available. So this is something which you must realize, that there is undoubtedly a complete responsibility on the part of this cabinet for bringing this position on us, the citizens.
Let me go one step further. Not only, as you now say, it is a criminal failure, a disastrous failure, to have failed to prepare for a second wave, which was inevitable because it happened in every single other major country in the world. But now, as that second wave is happening, the government is permitting, in fact, encouraging huge big election rallies to continue in Bengal. Earlier, they were happening in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, in Assam, in Pondicherry. And now also, beyond suggesting weekly that the Shahi Shnan should be symbolic and getting ignored by the so-called Bairagi akhadas, they are going to continue as well, and the government's done nothing to stop them. So does that compound the irresponsibility that these huge events are happening, which are likely to become super spreader events and spread the virus further?
Let me tell you something. I mean, I have, little serious take on this. Let me begin by reminding your viewers that BJP in its manifesto 2019, which they called Sankalpa Patra, and they talked about Sankalpit Bharat and Shashakt Bharat. They said, and this is what is important, the next 5 years are crucial break in 2000, a very crucial break in 2022. We mark 75th anniversary of our independence. Generations of great women and men let down their lives so that we could breathe air of freedom. It is our sacred duty to create India of their dreams. This is their manifesto in 2019. Now, what do they say? As a continuing government, we will build on fundamentals laid out in last 5 years in terms of, most importantly, building a basic safety net for the deprived section of the society. We have demonstrated what we can be achieved by a committed and decisive leadership that is not afraid to take hard decisions and decisions. Then on the health front, the manifesto says making healthcare accessible, strengthening healthcare infrastructure. Now, if this was the manifesto, this is how you get the votes from millions or hundreds of millions of people. Why have you forgotten? Why have you not taken the right decision? Let me tell you one thing. National Disaster Management Act is totally ignored. If they had followed that act in letter and spirit, which was born because of intervention.
Not following the National Disaster Act is the point you brought up with me almost a year ago in interviews. Let's not go back in time. Today, when the second surge of coronavirus is hitting 275,000 a day, is it again criminal irresponsibility to allow election rallies to continue, to allow Shahi Shnans to continue? Focus on that for me, Mr. Dave.
Let me answer that, but before I must tell you, if you had a national disaster plan, you could have avoided at least the second wave. You could have fought it. Nobody says that virus will not enter India. Of course, it will come somehow. But you should have been prepared with a national plan and national actions. And every state should have had a state plan and state actions. Now, you should have consulted experts, not the Prime Minister's office, not few, so-called experts who come on television every day and give all kinds of gyan to us. You should have really consulted the real This country does not have dearth of, competent people. It has great people. Now, Prime Minister and his cabinet have singularly ignored in doing that. If you had done that, you would have had no vaccine problem, you would have had no oxygen problem, you would have had no bed problem, you would have had no ventilator problem. All these could have been easily planned.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you a specific question?
Answering, no, let me answer. You are right that the Prime Minister, frankly, what is it that is bothering me and bothering the citizens across? I think the Prime Minister has singularly ignored us, the people of India, because of his complete obsession with West Bengal. And he and his colleagues, particularly Amit Bhai Shah, are so obsessed about defeating Mamta that they have really ignored their constitutional duties and obligations that were paramount, which they should have done it at least by January end or February. Now, this is something, let us for God's sake pray that they succeed in Bengal today. So that from tomorrow at least they should start looking at the health and well-being of citizens. What is this obsession? Now, so far as Shahistan is concerned, you sent thousands of people in Nizamuddin Markaz to jail. Why? And today, you did not stop the Kumbh Mela. You allowed millions of people to gather there. They are now all going back with Gangajal and COVID in every village, in every city, and in every street of the country. Now, who is responsible?
Absolutely. Mr. Dave, stop there, because there are many things I want to bring up. So we need to find time to focus on them all. I want to ask you one more question about the Modi government before I branch out to other institutions that have let down India. And this one more question is about the Modi government's vaccination strategy. It's a very simple question. Please hear me carefully. As far back as June, July last year, when vaccine manufacturers like Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca were talking about 2-dose vaccines, we knew at that time, 10 months ago, that if we're going to vaccinate 75% of our people, we need 2 billion doses. It wasn't rocket science, it was simple elementary mathematics. Secondly, we knew again 10 months ago that the total vaccine making capacity of the country simply cannot make 2 billion vaccines in a limited time frame. So 10 months ago, we knew that we cannot vaccinate at more than 2.5 million doses a day. We need to do it at 5 million or 10 million. Was the government irresponsible in not immediately boosting vaccine manufacturing capacity? Because we didn't. We did nothing.
I think not only government was irresponsible, but it was grossly negligent. And this is very troublesome because, let me put it this way. Prime Minister has made some 70, 80 foreign trips and claims to be a bosom friend of virtually every leader of the world. This was the right opportunity for Prime Minister to have cultivated his friendship with the world leaders, to come out with a joint vaccine production program. And this could have started way back in June or July of 2020. Now, if they had worked together, all these leaders worldwide, then, since India has the largest manufacturing capacity, all these companies could have been invited to, manufacture at Poonawala's factory. We could have, whichever way we could have stocked it. There was no planning whatsoever. There has been no production planning. There has been no purchase planning. There has been no vaccination program properly done. So I think in a country of 1.3 billion people, if you needed to vaccinate at least 75% people to bring about herd immunity, then I think you should have thought about it long back. And I think Mr. Modi has done great disservice to himself, because he has really in this process lost his image as a decisive leader, as a strong leader. And Mr. Modi's failure is at the cost of lives of innocent men, women, and children, and at the cost of millions of people, today going through the pain.
Mr. Dave, you specifically mentioned Poonawala and the Serum Institute. I want to ask you one more question about Serum Institute in particular before I come to other institutions that have let down India. As you know, as the whole world knows, Aadhar, Poonawalla and Serum invested and risked their own money in manufacturing and stockpiling AstraZeneca, which is called Covishield in India, long before the vaccine was cleared. They took a risk because they wanted a stock in readiness so that if the vaccine was cleared, it would be there in sufficient quantity to immediately use. UK, the United States, and the European Union placed advanced orders and paid for them to Serum before the actual vaccine was cleared. They paid for these orders to Serum as well as to AstraZeneca in England. Again, before the orders were cleared, those countries also took a risk. India did not. And yet Serum is an Indian company in Pune. Should Mr. Modi's government not have done the same thing as UK did, USA did, the European Union?
See, as I said, Prime Minister, unfortunately, likes to, amass entire power and authority into himself or the Prime Minister's office, as is well known in this country. As a result of that, he is unfortunately not aided and advised by the best experts in the field of disaster that we need and which we have. So as a result of that, I don't think the Prime Minister really ever thought of this magnitude of the problem which was going to strike us, and he therefore was never prepared for it. All that he believed was some completely irresponsible statements of some of his ministers and some of his so-called health experts, who kept on assuring that India has won a big victory against COVID, and that in fact Prime Minister many a times taunted the foreign countries in his speeches that how India has achieved completely COVID-free nation, and that we have done a great remarkable progress in this regard. And also, so far as the COVID production was concerned, we went on, claiming all kinds of things. Yes, we should have been extraordinarily, vigilant about it. We should have had a fantastic planning about it. And we should have really taken great advantage of this facility that we have in this country to get and garner as much vaccines as possible to inoculate people in this country.
I'm just going to repeat one sentence you said there because I think it's terribly important. You said the Prime Minister never thought of the magnitude of the problem he faced, and therefore he was never fully prepared for the size and scale of the problem that hit India. In other words, utter unpreparedness. But let's now move beyond the Modi government. We've discussed the Modi government and how you believe it has at a critical time let down India badly. Let's come to state governments. Because after all, a lot of the management of the COVID crisis is done at state level. I'm talking about testing, tracing, and tracking, and in particular now, vaccinating. Are state governments also lax? Are they also letting down India?
I have no doubt that across the countries, state governments have miserably failed, irrespective of political, affiliation of the government of a particular state, in at least testing. If we had carried out honest testing, which was expected, if you actually take the real figures, real statistics, the biggest problem of India today is that there is no information available. And this is Mr. Modi's government's great achievement, that it really denies to people the real and right information. State governments are equally responsible. As a result of that, the figures of actual testing are completely nonsensical. Nobody can believe them. Be that as it may, even if you take the figures at the best as claimed by them, we have not been able to test more than 10 or 20% of our population. Now, if you don't have proper testing, then you don't know how many people are actually having COVID at what point of time. And this is where there has been a singular failure on the part of the state. Health is a state subject also. Disaster is a central government subject, but health is a state subject. And the state governments were therefore clearly responsible to protect the lives and well-being of the citizens as much as Mr. Modi's government was.
Okay. Now, we have blamed the Modi government for the fact that huge election rallies continued and still do in Bengal. And we've blamed the Modi government for the Kumbh Mela, where Mr. Modi at best has said it should become symbolic, but the Bairagi Akharas are reluctant to accept, and they've decided they will continue, and Mr. Modi seems to be quiet about that. He's not doing anything to stop them. However, when it comes to election rallies, every other political party competing in elections surely is equally to blame. I'm talking of the TMC, the left, Congress, the DMK. All of them held huge rallies. None of them was willing to stop it. All of them put their own party's interests ahead of the state health and the health of their voters. How irresponsible have those political parties been? How much of the blame falls with them?
Karan, a crisis like this for a poor nation like India really needs what is popularly called a unity government. A government, not really that opposition should be part of the government and become ministers, but a kind of a unity governance. And that would mean that all the political parties should get together, apply their minds, and have joint action to fight this disaster for the welfare of the citizens. Now, political parties, unfortunately, are all the same. None of them is more responsible than the other, be it Congress or BJP or TMC or DMK or even the communists. Now, as a result of that, nobody ever suggested that the elections could be postponed, and they should have been happy. See, many a time during Congress time, how many times elected governments were dismissed and governors were running the states? So the opposition shouldn't really have been wary that the governor is going to run the state after the expiry of the term of the particular government. Be that as it may, the real fault lies with the election commission.
Absolutely.
And this is where I must say that a constitutional body has done a great disservice to itself and to the nation. They should have ensured that the elections are postponed, or if they are not postponed, they are held at as early as possible and in one go. If you can do it in Tamil Nadu in one go, there is no justification for doing it in 5 or 8 in Assam and West Bengal. You are really playing in the hands of party in power in that regard.
I'm very glad you've come to the Election Commission, because I was keen to move beyond political institutions that have let India down to others that are not political but are still critical to India's democratic framework. The first is clearly the Election Commission. Now, as you said, they should have first insisted that the elections rallies were held virtually, not physically. Secondly, perhaps they should have considered postponing elections, or at least holding them at one go rather than spreading it over 8 weeks. However, even last week, when Mamata Banerjee suggested collapse the remaining 3 or 4 voting days into one, the Election Commission failed to act. Instead, it's gone by the opinion of both the Modi government and, I should add, the left parties, that it would be wrong to deny the voters who haven't voted the right to proper rallies, because all the other voters earlier had proper rallies, therefore this lot should have it as well. Frankly speaking, isn't this a time for the Election Commission to take a bigger, broader national picture in mind rather than these little petty, foolish concerns? And I'm deliberately using that language.
I think election commission's functioning apparently is partisan, and I don't think they are looking at the larger welfare of the people or the larger welfare of the nation. They are only looking at what the party in power is really desiring, and party in power in center is desiring that the election process in Bengal should be as much spread over as possible, so that they can have as many rallies. I mean, it is really sad to see that a man as tall as Narendra Modi is today, and he is unparalleled leader. Whether I like him or not, that's not the issue. Fact of the matter is, Mr. Modi is unparalleled today. There is nobody who can come anywhere near him, nobody who can challenge him. Now, for a person of that persona, that stature, to go to Bengal some 15, 16 times to campaign against Mamata Banerjee to wrest power in West Bengal, to my mind, is really unbecoming of the office of a prime minister.
Can I interrupt and add this? It's not just that Mr. Modi has been to Bengal 15, 16 times, but he continues to hold massive rallies each time he goes, where there is very little mask wearing and absolutely no social distancing. And on Sunday, He was applauding the rally for the number of people who had turned out. In other words, he was encouraging more and more people to come to such rallies, knowing that they can spread the virus, knowing they could become possibly, God forbid, super spreaders. So in other words, he's compounding his irresponsibility in permitting rallies to happen with his rhetoric, which is encouraging people to come in bigger and bigger numbers.
I think Mr. Modi's actions are guided by pure and simple politics, nothing else. I don't think it is guided by welfare of people, and I'll tell you why. On 30th August 2020, Prime Minister Modi had reiterated need to maintain social distancing and wearing of mask amid COVID-19 pandemic. And he said, we can safeguard our health by observing do gaz ki duri, mask zaruri.
Well,
now, where is that?
Completely forgotten. But let's move on. I'm running out of time, and yet there are two more critical institutions that I want to ask you about and question whether you believe they too are guilty of letting down India at the time the country faces its worst crisis, its independence. The first is an institution you're very familiar with, the Supreme Court. Do you believe the Supreme Court has let the country down?
Absolutely. I have no doubt that Supreme Court has failed to discharge the constitutional duties which are, imposed upon it by the constitutional fathers. And they know it damn well what those duties are. After all, their power of, public interest litigation and suo motu exercise of power is something which is so beautiful. It is really to protect the well-being of the citizens. It is to protect the lives of the citizens. It is to protect the constitutional legal rights of the citizens. And the Supreme Court, it's been a silent spectator to what is happening for last few weeks, particularly last few months. It was the same Supreme Court which in the migrant crisis took suo motu action and passed some kind of, I would say, not very effective orders. But they did take it at that point of time. Secondly, what is worse is that this very Supreme Court justified and called the PM Care Fund as a private trust of certain individuals. Now, we saw that when the PM Care Fund wanted the people to invest, I have also donated 50 lakhs of rupees. They came out with massive advertisements for all kinds of promises. In last 1 year, have you heard even a word from PM Care Fund as to where those thousands of crores are being spent? And why is Supreme Court silent about it? So I personally feel that the Supreme Court had a great opportunity. It is a case of missed opportunities on the part of the Supreme Court, not only to help citizens, but to win their hearts over. Okay. And this is where I feel that Supreme Court has really singularly done great damage to the Constitution, to rule of law, and to this nation.
I have time, Mr. Dave, for only one last question, and it would be remiss of me not to raise the media as an institution and to ask you whether you believe the media also is guilty of letting down India at this moment of time. I know that the COVID crisis has got blanket coverage in the media, but I'm not talking of the quantity of coverage. I'm talking about the quality. Has the media focused properly? Has it exposed faults adequately? Has it inquired sufficiently deeply of the government? And has it brought before the country the relevant details and facts that would give people assurance? In that sense, has the media let down India, or has it lived up to what it was required to do?
I think media has definitely let down people of India. And I feel that media had a very, very critical role. It was an instructive role. It was an informative role. It was a pressure building role. It was a critical role. Every kind of a role could have been played by media to really cajole the government, to coerce the government into action by exposing the inaction of the government, by its failures, by its complete negligence, by its complete apathy to the problem of the people. And this is where, media. Now, take, for example, Nizamuddin Markaz incident. Section of media virtually treated Muslims of this country as walking terrorists. You know what kind of a vicious campaign was launched by them. I argued a petition before Supreme Court against the failure of the Supreme Court, before Chief Justice Bopade's bench, so that government could take some action against this section of the media. 6 times I appeared before Chief Justice Bobude's bench. He made sound and fury, did not pass any order to the government, asking the government, because government had not acted, and government won't act because this section of media are favorites of the government. Everybody knows about it. But media certainly had a great responsibility, and barring a very few section of the media, very minuscule fraction of media, most of the media. Now look at the COVID coverage. Every day they are showing this so-called expert. What has a heart doctor got to do with COVID? Tell me, for God's sake. You can have a pulmonologist. You can have critical care, this thing. You can even have a general physician coming and guiding you. All these experts who come day in and day out for last 1 year telling us about COVID, not one of these experts has told us till today how nation was prepared or ill prepared about fighting COVID. That has now broken out. And this is where media never consulted, invited anybody to discuss or the preparedness or the steps to be taken or the availability of vaccines or the vaccine program or oxygen or ventilator or health or hospitals, nothing. Okay. So I personally feel media is, I would say, completely myopic in its approach towards this kind of a national crisis. Instead of standing by with the people, it is standing by the establishment. And this is really a very sad commentary on us. Let me tell you one thing. Let me tell you one thing or two things.
Quickly, sir.
Sahir Ludhianvi's cry many years ago, Jine Naaz hai Hind par wo kahan hai. Now this is really the problem today. Where are the people? Where are the leaders who really who love this country, who can really do something extraordinary, to really take us out of this problem and save the lives of people, save the suffering of the people? Where are they? Okay. So what we need is something which, explained very.
Come to an end, Mr. Dave. We're running out of time. Please be very fast.
In the 70s, there was a song which I used to love. And this song is something which reminds me, and I must tell the nation that that's the song nation must hear. It was, sung by Jimmy James and the Vagabonds. And the words are, now is the time to set things right. Now is the time we should unite. We don't need revolutions. We just need to open our eyes. Revolution is no solution. We ought to realize now is the time to set things right. This is what we need. We need to open our eyes.
Not only is now the time to set things right, if we don't, God help us, because other than God, there's no one else around. Things are looking very bleak, and I'm glad you have drawn the nation's attention, not just to the crisis of COVID, but to the deeper, more worrying concern about how our critical institutions, the central government, the state governments, the election commission, political parties, the judiciary, and the media have all let down the country just when we needed them most to be by our side. Thank you very much for this interview.
I end by praying for the well-being of citizens of this country. I pray to Almighty to save every one of them.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. Take care.